Welcome to the Co-Movement Gym podcast. This week we are talking with Dr. Stephen Geanopulos. Dr. G is a renowned board certified chiropractic neurologist dedicated to holistic health. He is one of America's leading experts in lifelong optimized living. Dr. G recently visited our facility and tested the VO2 Max on 5 participants. VO2 Max is a powerful predictor of long term health and longevity. Studies have shown that individuals with a higher VO2 max tend to have a lower risk of various chronic diseases, including heart disease, diabetes, and even certain types of cancer. A higher VO2 max could mean more years of life, and more importantly, more active, healthy years. In today's conversation, we are going to discuss in detail what VO2 max is, how to improve, and we will be reviewing my personal testing results. The Co-Movement Gym podcast is sponsored by Native Path Supplements, Lombardi Chiropractic, and A Dog's Day Out Doggy Daycare. Mention this podcast or use the promo code in the episode description for a nice discount on us. Dr. G, welcome back to the Co-Movement Gym podcast. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here with you, Josh.
Yeah, so I want to dive right into a topic you and I are both really passionate about, and we got to experience in real time here at Co-Movement Gym when you came up and visited us not too long ago, and that was the VO2 Max testing that we did. We hear the term VO2 max in today's media and fitness world quite frequently, but a lot of people don't know what it is and why it's so important to longevity. So this episode, I want to get into exactly what VO2 max is, why it's important to longevity, how we can test it, and all the bells and whistles around it. So how's that sound?
Sounds great.
Awesome. So can you explain to our listeners, first off, what VO2 max is?
Sure. It's basically a 100-year-old technology, right? We've been looking at trying to analyze what happens when we breathe in and breathe out for over 100 years, and we've been able to do that. And by analyzing what we breathe in and breathe out, we can learn a lot about how the body is utilizing fuel, right? Because people who listen to me always know I always talk about fuel in two parts, right? There's oxygen and glucose, right? There's oxygen and the food we eat. So we tend to focus on the oxygen, on the glucose or the food part, but we don't necessarily focus on the oxygen part. And VO2 max testing and cardiorespiratory testing is also a great name for it, is a great way to look at those markers. And I say it's 100 years old, but it's not really used in a medical setting very often. It's usually used in a research setting and in a sports setting. So it's something that's always been used for great athletes or elite athletes to kind of try to predict. They used to think that if you had a genetic ability to maximally intake and utilize oxygen, that could predict how fast you could run and your ability to win. Now we know that that's not true, and we can talk about that you can't really predict somebody's speed or their ability to win at a certain contest based on their VO2 max. But what we've learned is that the technology can be used for anyone and everyone. And because now the technology is not as cumbersome and expensive as it once was, and the data analysis is not as well, it's just as complex, if not more complex than it was before. But now we have technology to help us read that data and make it more meaningful. So that's kind of a little historical breakdown on what it is. As far as why it's important, that's the purpose of this discussion. So.
Okay, so yeah, so to summarize just real clearly for people, it's how well the body utilizes the oxygen that it takes in, correct?
Correct. Like we assume if we can breathe, if there's nothing wrong with our lungs, that the oxygen is getting in, it's being delivered throughout the body, and being utilized efficiently throughout the body. And those are massive assumptions that you really can't make, because you could have great lungs that bring the oxygen in, but you may have poor red blood cells that may not be able to deliver the oxygen where it needs to go as efficiently. Or you may have a situation where your muscle cells are not able to burn or use the fuel that it's been given in an efficient way. So we're really looking at the oxygen coming in, its ability to be delivered. So the lungs take it in, the heart uses the blood vessels to deliver it around the body, and then the cells of the body, and we say muscles, but really all the cells in our body, will then use the oxygen for energy, for fuel, and then will kind of send back the waste products and measure what gets blown off in our breath as a waste product. So it's a super important test for general health, because every illness you can think of, especially the ones most of us are concerned about, which is chronic, right? Chronic poor health, metabolic disorder, cardiovascular disease, brain disorders like early Alzheimer's or cognitive decline, all of these things that we call chronic disorders will impact something along the lines of how that oxygen is taken in, utilized, and the waste products are excreted. So poor health in any category is going to negatively influence the findings on this test.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, for people listening, it's from a longevity standpoint, it's in their best interest to learn how to improve their VO2 max score. First, they would want to get a base testing, and then they would want to go through the proper training to improve on it. And then they would want to get some post testing to see where they are, because you and I have looked at these charts. There's charts based on age, gender, and that ranks you, so you can see where you fall with your VO2 max, everywhere from sick to elite. Um, and so I'm a huge fan of this. Like you said earlier, you had mentioned it being only in like academic institutions and elite institutions, but now for people that are out in front in the fitness and health industry, they're utilizing this test in their facilities. And so it's very, very exciting. So let's talk about how people go through testing. 5 of us at Co-Movement Gym just recently did this with you. It was a fabulous experience. I learned a ton. So how does the average person get their VO2 max tested?
So the first thing we do is we use a device. It's kind of like a mask. We've all seen pictures of athletes running on treadmills, and they have a mask hooked up with tubes going into machines, and it's analyzing. It's that kind of technology. And now that technology, which used to be in what's called a metabolic cart, which would be a whole bunch of computers, and it was a very expensive, for many, many years. It could have been between $50,000 and $100,000 worth of technology that you needed on a big, heavy cart. And it could only really have been done like I said, in a research or a clinical setting. Now, this technology is quite literally less than 2 pounds, and we got to experience that and use that with our device. And the data is transferred onto an app on my phone, and then sent off to the engineers at the company that we're using, Stanford engineers, who then use that data to generate a report. So that the technology has just gotten so democratized, right? And there are other services out there. There are companies out there. But when we did it, you got to see that it does require a little bit of coaching during the process, because we want to kind of push the person to get to their max. But the test is broken down into 2 parts. The first one is called resting metabolic rate. That's where you're fasting in the morning, you lay down on a mat, and you just totally relax. And for 10 minutes, we analyze your breath. And that gives us your how many calories that you would need in a day just to exist. It would allow us to calculate based on your activity level what your calorie needs would be for any given day. And that can be important to people who actually have to count calories. That is true for people trying to lose weight. That's true for people who are trying to compete in athletics, where they're training so hard that they may not be getting in enough calories in order to provide them what they need. So a resting metabolic rate can be very important, but it also looks at things you would never think of, right? It looks at your heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is super important because that tells us how ready you are for some stress for that day. It also tells us about your respiratory rate, how fast you're breathing and how deep you're breathing. So for example, if your breathing is shallow and rapid, it's going to impact a couple of things. Number one, it's going to impact oxygen delivery to your brain. So your ability to think for that day, if you're having trouble focus and concentration and maybe issues with depression and anxiety, it could be related to oxygen delivery, and rapid shallow breathing can be picked up and addressed with this technology. But also the stability you have in your spine will, if the poorer your spinal stability is, the more rapid and shallow you will breathe, and that will be or can be predictive of injury to spinal muscles, which we all know that 85% of the public is going to experience a pretty nasty event at some point in their life in their lumbar spine. It would be great to be able to kind of pick up a sense of what's coming or what may come, and therefore you can have different strategies to mitigate that. So that laying down for 10 minutes on your back with this device on your face gives us a wealth of information, not just about your calorie needs, but also about your cognition and also about your spinal stability. The next part of the test is the active part. Now, the active part, those of you at Co-Movement Gym who did this were very capable people between the age of 24 and 54. We had kind of the whole scope there. We had male, female, athletes, non-athletes, and we were able to push everyone to their maximum. Now, you may think about being pushed to your maximum as kind of like a stress test, and it certainly is. We get you to push as hard as you can, either on a rower, a treadmill, even a stationary bike, depending on what your sport of choice is. And that gives us your VO2, or your volume of oxygen maximum that you can take in. And we'll talk about why that's important from a longevity standpoint, but that gives you kind of an overview of the testing process. Now, because the people in the room at Co-Movement were pretty fit, the test probably took longer than it would for the average person, because we had to push each of you, minute by minute. We had to increase the intensity until you gave out. And you guys just were stubborn and didn't want to give out. And you're all competing with each other, and pretty much took yourselves to the maximum. And that's really, really good. However, we're about to do this test on an 80-year-old, and we want to know his VO2 max. Of course, we're not going to push him to the way we had pushed the team at Co-Movement. We are going to push him, but maybe we're going to push him to 60%, 65%, 70% of his maximum. And what's beautiful about technology is that we can now accurately extrapolate his VO2 max, even though he didn't give, or she doesn't give a maximum effort. So we can still do this test on people of very advanced age. And it's very important to do this test on people who are at advanced age, because we know that your VO2 max declines at a certain rate per decade after your fourth decade of life. And Medicare actually assigns a number. If your VO2 max is 18 or less, you are disabled.
Wow.
You're unable to take care of yourself. And therefore, if your and if you're declining at 10% per decade, and you're 55 years old and your VO2 max is 25, Well, calculate 10% per decade moving forward. By the time you're 75 or 80 years old, if you live to the average in the United States, your VO2 is going to be so low you won't be able to take care of yourself. And just imagine what that does for your brain health, your body health, your hip fractures, your ability to manage stairs, and take care of yourself. So this is why it's important to optimize, to know your current state of VO2, maximize it, optimize it the best you can, and then have a training program that will allow you to not decline at 10% per decade, but allow you to decline at maybe 3 to 5% per decade. So the glide path down, and we're all going down, it can be so that when you're at the advanced age that you're blessed to be, whether it be 80, 85, 90, 100, 105, I don't know. But if you can keep your VO2 max at 25 or 30 in those advanced decades of your life, the likelihood that you can take care of yourself is very high. It's actually the most predictive. There's nothing more. There's no health assessment anyone can do that's more predictive of your quality of life at it in your advanced decades than VO2 max. So
Wow.
it is worth knowing, and it is worth improving, and it can be improved in everyone.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I've read that with not only with all the stuff that you've put out, but like Dr. Peter Attia, how it is like the number one physical health metric that people should have done,
Hmm.
and improve upon. So I'll give people just a little bit of a detailed analysis on like the test that we went through on the rower. So this doesn't have to be a running test necessarily. It
Hmm.
could be on a bike, it could be on a rower, a stair climber. We did it on a rower, and so you had started us out at a certain number of watts for 2 minutes, and we would hold that pace, and it was a slow pace. And those watts were determined by our age, our fitness ability, sort of a whole host of things that you put into the app, into the system. And so for 2 minutes, we rode at a certain pace. And then from there on out, every minute, we increased that pace. For me, I think it was like you increased 15 watts a minute until
Hmm.
I failed. And failed would be defined as not being able to hold the pace. And so after the test was done, you had us continue to row slowly, and then we stopped, and you watched how fast our heart rate dropped and recovered. And you took these percentages, and the system, the computer system, I'm sure, you know came up with so much cool information, like with maximal heart rate, obviously a VO2 max score, recovery, which was huge, lung capacity, which was huge, heart health, all in a 14-minute working test. And like you said, for a lot of people, it could be like maybe 8 to 10 minutes, depending.
Correct.
And then the 10-minute test where we're laying down doing the resting metabolic work. And so the test, while it is uncomfortable towards the end because you're pushing your limits, it's nowhere near a lot of the tests that I've done. Like a 2K row sprinting test was much more uncomfortable for much longer time. So what I'm getting at is, so for people that are nervous maybe about having this because they're not an athlete or whatnot, like you had said, they can be pushed to 70 to 80% capacity and still get very accurate data on this. And so I wanted to give people an idea of what our testing process looked like with that.
I appreciate you bringing that up because it's very important. You, like you just said, it could be 8 to 10 minutes for someone. It could be 14 or 15 minutes for others. But the perception is that you're going to be going full tilt for 14
Yeah.
minutes or 8 minutes. That's not the case. As a matter of fact, we own most of the test is quite mild, right? Because we're ramping up. There's a significant warm up, there's a ramping up phase, and so much data is being gathered during that time. So that warm up is very important. from a data collection standpoint, gives us the respiratory rate, what we were saying about your postural and spinal stability. All that data is being collected. Your ability to, where's the point where your muscles are going to take away so much oxygen from your brain that your ability to think is going to be compromised, and we get a score there. And as we ramp up, so the maximum portion is not very long, right? It could be a minute. So it's not an intimidating test. Certainly not. It's not something you would want to be nervous about.
Yeah, and when I went into it, I was thinking like 10 to 20 minutes of straight pain, just because what I'm used to, like with CrossFit and rowing and running intervals and all this stuff, right? But it wasn't like that. It was actually really enjoyable. Like I would test it today again. So yeah, no, that was cool. The number one thing that I took away, like I knew VO2 max going into this test was a very important score for health. It's the number one metric that we can test as far as we know right now. And so from a physical capability, but what I didn't understand was like the cognitive piece, the stability piece, calories, heart rate. Like you get this huge printout that isn't just one number score and then it's just a score. You and I had a 30-minute meeting after we got a score, and you went through all of the data with us. And so let's sort of get into some of that now, and you can use my stuff for an example if you want. Let's go step by step and we can sort of go quickly through it, but I want people to see the headlines and the topics that they get from analyzing the results of a VO2 max. So can we go through that?
Sure. Now, let me, I actually have it up here.
Okay.
And
yeah, because this is just so important. Like when you and I scheduled our Zoom meeting to go over the results, I was really thinking that it was just going to be a score, and then you would say how well I utilized oxygen in my body, and then it was going to be left at that. It was actually the exact opposite. I think there was somewhere in the vicinity of maybe 12 to 15 different metrics that are scored based on this one test. So let's go over that. Native Path has been a podcast sponsor of ours since day one, and it's because our clients feel amazing using their supplements. While a lot of products on the market today contain useless fillers and incorrect dosages, Native Path holds to a higher standard. Native Path's ingredients are sourced from only the highest quality, properly combined nutrients, all while being offered at competitive prices. Use code COMO15, that's COMO15 at checkout, and receive 15% off each order. Lombardi Chiropractic has been Co-Movement's trusted chiropractor for the last 14 years. They have worked with hundreds of our clients, and I can confidently say they have the most knowledgeable and holistic approach to care that I have ever seen. Whether you suffer from migraines, low energy, nagging pain, or just simply want to improve your overall health, I highly recommend contacting the team at Lombardi Chiropractic. Mention the Co-Movement Gym podcast and receive 50% off your initial consultation and x-rays. Here at Co-Movement, we put a lot of energy into helping you become happy, healthy, and strong. But we're not the only ones needing a good workout. That's why a dog's day out is the best place in Central New York for your pet to spend their day. Your dog will be as happy and healthy as you when you let them run, play, and socialize instead of just sitting on the couch waiting for you to come home. Give your dog the active day out that they deserve. Mention this podcast and get a free day of doggy daycare at a dog's day out.
So one of the categories that we pick up are basically, what is your aerobic capacity, right? Your ability to use oxygen while being active, right? So this is important because there's when you get up in the morning and you're doing your household daily activities and you're walking the dog and even you just go for a brisk walk for yourself, the majority of the energy that you use for that is going to be utilized with oxygen, and it's going to be a significant amount of that energy is going to come from either the fat in your diet, or especially if it's in the morning, it's going to be your stored body fat. Now, going for a brisk walk or a light walk, or walking your dog, or just doing household daily activities, even though the majority of the calories you use to do that stuff is going to come from body fat, it's not really like a whole lot, right? You're not going to burn a lot of body fat just washing the dishes. But that's important because we want to know your aerobic capacity. You can't burn fat without oxygen. Now, there is a point where you increase your activity where the demand for energy is going to rise faster than your ability to utilize and deliver oxygen. And that's okay because we can actually use a different kind of fuel with less oxygen or without oxygen. And that fuel is blood sugar, right? Which is kind of something we want to preserve because at the higher intensities of activity, we want to have enough of that fuel. So for example, if you're walking through the woods, you want to be burning your body fat because you could store hundreds of thousands of calories on your body in the form of fat. So you want to use that energy, whereas you could only store about 2,000 calories of glucose or that rocket fuel that can be burned with or without oxygen. So you want to preserve that and only use it for the higher intensity stuff. So if you're walking through the wilderness or through the woods on a nice brisk walk, you're meditating, contemplating life, and all of a sudden a bear jumps out and you have to run, you have that rocket fuel there, and hopefully within 20 or 30 minutes, you can get away and save your life and use all that sugar, that rocket fuel. So understanding your aerobic capacity is important. Again, aerobic meaning your oxygen burning ability, right? So on yours, you came out at 100%. Like it didn't, there's no better than that. And then of course, once your aerobic or your ability to utilize oxygen is understood, the next category we looked at is your cardiovascular fitness. How well can your heart deliver that oxygen to all the tissues that need that oxygen? And that's another measurement, your cardiovascular fitness. You came up at, again, 100%. Excellent. Then there's fat burning efficiency and metabolic rate. So fat burning efficiency is, are you able to increase your heart rate while burning fat higher and higher? So if someone starts being unable to burn fat at, let's say, 140 beats a minute, and a comparable person of the same weight and gender and age is going to start not being able to burn fat and have to use sugar at 160, well, then the one that goes to 160 has a far more efficient fat burning ability. And that's important because the less fit you are, the quicker you'll stop or reduce. Again, there's no such thing as only fat and only sugar. You're always using both. Like I don't want to, but for simplicity purposes, the maximum fat burning, the lower the heart rate is for that to be cut off and in favor of sugar, in favor of glucose, the less fit you are. So your fat burning efficiency is super important. You came up 90%, so you got 10% to improve. But 90%, again, excellent. And then all of a sudden, we look at your test, and something called metabolic rate came up ridiculously low, like limited. You're at 34%.
Yeah.
And that's partly because this data is not calculated by me at my desk doing all kinds of equations. That's not happening. We put it into a software, and the software is really designed, this particular software that we use is designed for people looking to improve their health, looking to lose weight, looking to improve their metabolic health. It's not the type of software, the equipment is, but it's not the type of software we would necessarily use for an elite athlete. And the reason why your metabolic rate came up as limited is because you and Andy at Co-Movement both are so efficient that the amount of energy, I always like it, if we could say the average person, let's say, gets 20 miles per gallon, right? To use a car analogy, you guys are getting 80 miles per gallon. You're able to take your fuel and efficiently burn it at a very low level while doing very high levels of activity, right? So that makes your metabolic rate is super low. Now, we see that elite athletes who either retire or get injured, their metabolic rate is so low that they gain a lot of weight pretty darn quick. And you'd think, well, they're bored, they have nothing to do, so they're eating all day. And that's actually not true. You're more likely to gain weight on your normal calorie intake when you're that efficient and not being active. Okay, so you have this massive kind of weight gain. But you and Andy are not in that situation where you're not active with a low metabolic rate. You're very active with a low metabolic rate, and that's actually a good thing. And then, of course, we have recovery capacity. When we slow the test down, we want to see how rapidly your heart rate comes down. If you get your heart rate to your maximum, let's just say that's 190 beats a minute, how quickly each minute does that heart rate come down? The more rapidly it comes down, the more the better your recovery capacity is. And your recovery capacity, again, 100%. Excellent. Then we have breathing and cognition, which is where we said, if your efficiency at delivering oxygen is compromised, the activity that you're doing is going to take precedence. So if you're going full tilt on a treadmill or a rowing machine, your muscles are going to use up your oxygen. And if you're poorly delivering that oxygen, well, then your brain is not going to get a whole lot. And your ability to think while being maximally active is going to be compromised. So what does this look like in the real world? Well, it's kind of hard, because most of us are not doing that kind of work. But there is a Winter Olympic event that's super cool. It's called a biathlon. And the biathlon is where you're cross-country skiing and then shooting, right? So here you are doing a VO2 max dependent activity, cross-country skiing. It's brutal as far as how it brings you to your maximum heart rate and oxygen carrying capacity. And then you got to drop down with your rifle and shoot at a target, which is a completely, it's a cognitive event. So if your breathing and cognition if your ability or efficiency at delivering oxygen to your muscles and your brain is compromised, you're going to not do well in that sport. So now just imagine, a lot of people listening might have had some experience playing golf. All right, just imagine, instead of carrying a whole set of golf clubs, you had 3 clubs. You had a putter, an iron, and a driver. And you hit the ball from the tee, and the contest was you have to run to your ball. And so it's like, they actually call it speed golf. This is a sport. This is a thing. And it's almost the same as the biathlon, right? You're running full speed, you get your heart rate way up there, and then you have to stop and hit the target. That's the cognitive side. So I love that this machine can measure your oxygen capacity as it relates to cognition. And then, of course, we have breathing and stability. So that stability side of things, if you're, again, gender, age, size matched, numbers don't match. If your heart rate is during the ramp up is more rapid than the average, than the normative data, well, then the stability that you have in your spine, remember, your diaphragm is attached to 5 of your spinal vertebrae. Your breathing mechanism in your chest, those are your ribs, and they're all, each of the 12 ribs on each side are attached to a vertebrae. So your spinal stability will dictate your breathing efficiency. And this machine can pick that up. And you came up 99 or 98% on breathing and cognition. So you got 2% room for improvement. And then on the stability side, you came up 79%. Good,
Mm-hmm.
not excellent. So the only place you didn't score excellent were in your breathing and stability. And we had a discussion about that. We said, look, you spend a lot of time not only in your business, which is fitness, but working on your business, which requires you to sit at a computer and kind of not be as posturally efficient as you'd like to be at 42 years old. So your breathing and stability is showing that there's room for improvement there. And I think the less time we all spend sitting at a desk, the better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. You and I talked about that, like in strengthening my, um, like spinal erectors with endurance. So like higher reps. Um, and so, yeah, I took a lot away from that because I do sit a lot, believe it or not. And I tell people this all the
Mm-hmm.
time. They think like I'm in the gym 10 hours a day. I'm in the gym like 1 to 2 hours a day and I sit. Like I run the show behind the scenes. I'm sitting right now on this call. I've got 3 more calls after this. So I do sit a lot. And so it's funny that that test picked that up. But I appreciate that. And yeah, that's an important metric for sure for everyone.
Yeah, but then there's the major metrics. So that's the nuts and bolts of the test. And of course, the report does give some ideas about diet and exercise that could certainly improve all of these findings. But what I love is the page where it gives your age and then your
Mhm.
biological age, and
Yes,
that's
yes.
really cool. And that has to do with VO2 max, right? Because we do have 50 to 100 years of data on what the most elite athletes and the sickest. I mean, we just have hundreds of thousands of people that have been tested. All that data is compiled. So at 41 years old, your biological age is 30, which is very
Mhm.
impressive. um,
Mhm.
that doesn't mean we live forever. It just means we live well while we're alive. And that to me is what longevity means. Longevity means living well today,
Yes.
tomorrow, the next day, and as long as you're alive to be able to live well, whatever that looks like for the decade that you're in. Um, but then the other major marker is your VO2 max, like that
Mhm.
number. Like we just put that number on a chart and see where you're at. And I think the average VO2 max for a 55-year-old is 30. Just to give you an idea, I'm 54 years old this year, and mine was 44.5.
Nice.
Um, Dr. Pete, who's the same age as I am, he hit 50. So
Nice.
that's my target. So that's it. I'm chasing Pete. I want to hit,
Mhm.
by 3 to 6 months, I want to hit 50 on my VO2 max. And I think we should talk about how we're going to improve our VO2 max,
Yes.
because again, that the higher we get it, and then we can set the lifestyle so that the glide path down is measured. There's certain things that you just can't fight. Like with age, your maximum heart rate goes down. Nothing's stopping
Yes.
that. There's nothing you can do to stop that. So for Andy, his maximum heart rate, I believe, was 190. I think yours was in the 180s.
Mhm.
Pete was at 169,
Mhm.
which, you know, there's no pushing that higher. So your VO2 max, same thing. It's going to glide down. It's going to glide down, but we want that downward path to be super slow.
Yeah, so I want to touch on that, Steve, Dr. G, real quick. So you had explained to me on our review call that like there's the chart that you're talking about and it sort of plots where your VO2 max is in relation
Mhm.
to, bad all the way to great. And we know that we decline our maximum heart rate and our VO2 max naturally goes down as we age. Now,
Mhm.
you had said 10% per decade, but that could be slowed to 3 to 5% per decade if we're doing things correctly. And so I want to emphasize to people listening to this, no matter your age, the higher your VO2 max you can get, right? You can score and improve upon. The better that decline is going to look. So if you're 40 and you test at 32, I can guarantee you by 70 or even 60, or you could argue now, things aren't good health wise. But the nice thing is, and you and I know this, and we train it, you can improve it. And so if you improve that VO2 max score, think about this on a chart. You go up the chart, you're higher now. Now that line that is slowly descending right into the grave eventually,
Mhm.
that line is starting out higher. And so your decline is in better condition versus getting into that red zone real soon. And so I just wanted to touch on that because I didn't understand any of that prior to you and I talking on the review call. So another reason to get your VO2 max higher sooner the better.
Yeah. So we could all take some activities that we might take for granted, right? So it could be climbing 3 flights of stairs, carrying a
Mhm.
couple of bags of groceries, lifting up a grandchild in a goblet squat kind of a manner, um, bounding up a flight of stairs, uh, climbing out of a swimming pool, getting up off the floor. All of these things require, you know, your cardiovascular fitness. They require strength. They require flexibility. They require some degree of speed. So you might say, well, I could do all those things. I'm 60 years old, so I'm all good. Well, think about that decline. So if you could do all those simple things at 60, 65, and 70, no one's really impressed. But now do all those things when you're 95, 100,
Mhm.
105, and all of a sudden everybody's super impressed, right?
Yep.
So if whatever that last, Peter Attia calls it the marginal decade, whatever that last decade is of your life, let's just say it's 90 or 100. Let's just, for numbers' sake, let's just say it's 100, right? Well, what can you do? And if you're 60, what do you need to be able to do if you want that capacity at 100? What do you need to be able to do at 80?
Mhm.
What do you need to be able to do at 70? And then what can you do now? And then say, all right, I want to train so that I can do those things at 100 in a way that's going to allow me to live a healthy or a good life on my own.
And I'll add to that. Um, it's not just about that last, you said marginal decade. It's about today.
That's
I
right.
can't tell you how many people that I hike with or maybe spend time with, family or friends, or just people I run across, and their aerobic capacity, and I'm talking like walking up a hill briskly, is hard.
Yeah.
Walking to the top of a ski hill to watch, what their child, ski down. It's very difficult or impossible. Pushing a wheelbarrow, with gravel in it for
Mhm.
50 yards, heart rate skyrockets. Climbing 10 flights of stairs, 5 flights of stairs, heart rate skyrocketing. Like, recovery takes a long time. So yes, the marginal decade is great, but I don't want people to lose insight into today also, in the importance of how good it feels to utilize oxygen correctly, not only cognitively but physically. Like, my wife and I just did a 5 mile hike on very hilly terrain on Saturday, and we were carrying 17 pound 8-week old child the whole time. And it was a great workout, but we were able to do that and have fun and talk, right? We weren't huffing and puffing and needing to take rests and getting lightheaded. And so, yeah, the marginal decade is huge. Today is huge. And so, all of that can be taken away with getting, the results of a score such as this.
I'm glad you brought that up because you're right. It is about today. It is about tomorrow. It is about what our maximum ability is right now, and it's good to know your maximum on a lot of things. And this is doing a VO2 max test is a controlled way of doing that. But the idea is again not I better train because I want to make sure when I'm 92. There's no guarantee you're making it to 92. You get hit by a truck.
Yep.
But whatever you do today, tomorrow, this weekend, you want to be able to do to the best of your ability. And this is where I think at this stage in my life, it being my 54th year, my number one fitness goal is don't get hurt because it takes longer and longer to recover. And you decline faster and faster during that recovery phase. So I can't tell you how many people, and you've done it too, they tell you their high school story, right? I used to lift
Yeah.
this many
Yeah.
pounds. I used to do this. I used to do that. And then you just stop and say, I'm sorry, how long ago was that? 25 years ago, really? So you're telling me stories about what you think you're supposed to benefit today from who you were 25 years ago when you've allowed yourself to decline, right? So the conversation is not, I need to work out early in my life so I can relax. No. The older you are, the more fitness activities you have to have to the point where you'll get to a certain point where you have to be active every day. That's why I've been doing a
Yes.
lot of posts on social media, just some funny stuff where I post people, children and adults and seniors and everyone lifting heavy things. Lift something heavy every day. Do something hard every day. This idea that don't bend, lift, don't hurt no, lift heavy things. Be safe, but lift heavy things and try to do it every day.
Yeah, the unfortunately the fitness industry has popularized the whole workout 3 days a week and you're going to be good to go. We don't stand for that at Co-Movement. We never did. I think you should be active at some level every day. You have a body, so you should use it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you shouldn't be differentiating necessarily like your gym workouts versus real life. And if I go to the gym 2 to 3 days a week for 45 minutes, I'm good to go. Yeah, you need your gym workouts, your strength, your conditioning, and this and that. But 7 days a week, you should be doing something. It does not need to be intense. And actually, as we age, our intensity will decrease, but the volume and consistency at which we train needs to be daily. There'll be periods of time where I get real busy. I'll go 1 to 2 days without structured training at all, whether it's sitting a lot or traveling or something. And I feel like shit. Like I don't feel good. I sleep like shit. My appetite's off,
Yeah.
aches and pains, and just I don't feel good. And so yeah, that was good that you brought that up. Let's talk about how to improve our VO2 max. There's one thing I want to put out there first before we get into some of the details with this. First off, it is individual. What you and I are going to talk about now is general because we don't know who we're speaking to. But at any age, we can improve the VO2 max. I think it's very important for people to get metrics such as maximal heart rate, their zone 2, their lactate threshold. There's some numbers that a professional, for the most part, needs to gather for you. And so based off of those metrics, we can give you specific and customized training to improve your VO2 max. But let's talk about, I guess, from a generalized perspective, Dr. G, how would someone improve VO2?
Okay, so this is where I think the rubber meets the road. We want people to have a takeaway here, and the takeaway is going to be this. First of all, having a visual to understand. So the best the best visual that I've heard described is that think of your VO2 max as, again, it's the volume of oxygen, right? So this idea of volume, think of a pyramid that, it's got that triangle shape. There's the peak, the height of the pyramid, there's the width of the base of the pyramid. And the wider the base and the higher the peak, the more volume inside the pyramid there is. So you want the greatest amount of volume. The base of the pyramid can be widened with what's called zone 2 exercise. Zone 2 exercise is long duration, low intensity types of exercise. We'll talk about that in just a second. And the peak of the pyramid is that high, that zone 4 and 5. It's kind of like the super high intensity stuff. If you're doing an assault bike or doing a sprint, if you're on your bicycle outside and you're going up a hill, something that you can do with maximum effort for 3 or 4 minutes, and then rest for 3 or 4 minutes, and then do it again for 3 or 4 minutes, and do some cycles of that. Let's just say 2 cycles, 3 cycles, 5 cycles. Now, you want to widen the base and raise the peak. You don't just want to raise the peak and do the high intensity stuff, because if you have a narrow base, it's not a very stable building, and the volume doesn't necessarily increase. So the zone 2, the widening of the base, and if you think about the sports or the athletes who have the highest peak, like the Tour de France guys, 80% of their fitness routine to train for the Tour de France is in zone 2, widening the base. So let's not underestimate that. Now, what does widening the base look like for the average bear? If you don't know your VO2 max, there is a calculation that a lot of people use for somebody who's just a weekend warrior or just starting to work out. If you take 180 minus your age, that would be your zone 2 heart rate. Again, it's not accurate, especially for guys like you, myself, Dr. Pete, Andy, Elizabeth, those of us who did the test, and Dr. Nate. It's different for us because we are more fit. So 180 minus your age. If you're more fit than the average bear, add 5. So if you're 40 years old, your zone 2 heart rate is 140, but if you're more fit, 145. Again, very rough calculation. If you're unfit, take away 5. So 180 minus 40 is 140, minus 5 is 135. And all you do is you can get on the treadmill, tilt it up, get it on an incline enough to get your heart rate to that zone 2 and try to hold it there, and do that for 30 to 45 minutes or for a total of 3 hours a week. You can break that up however you like to break it up. And that would be a good zone 2 training method. Now, there's other ways to improve your zone 2. It's not just about zone 2 and zone 4, 5 exercise, widening the base and raising the peak. While you're going for a walk with your dog, while you're walking, hold your breath. See how long you can hold your breath for while you're walking, while you're active. They're called, so there's holding your breath while sitting still, but holding your breath while doing something, that's zone 1, like walking your dog, is a great thing to do. So if you can take your dog out for a walk, hold your breath for 30 seconds while you're still walking, and then you improve that over time, you're improving your VO2 max. Another way to improve your VO2 max is breathing through your nose. Breathing through your nose is going to, again, while you're mildly active, not breathing through your mouth is going to increase your nitric oxide production. That nitric oxide is going to improve your blood vessel health, which is going to improve oxygen delivery, which is going to improve your VO2 max. Another great strategy for improving your VO2 max is lowering your body fat percentage while not letting your lean muscle mass go down, actually maybe even increasing it. So add muscle, reduce fat, improves your VO2 max. So these are all great strategies that don't only include these 2 types of exercise that we all talk about.
Now, I want to chat quickly on this heart rate piece. I think my zone two is like a between 125 and 140. And y- I did some testing recently in Florida where it's really flat and it's
Mhm.
outdoors, and I held a 136 heart rate, like pretty spot on flat terrain, 75 degrees, pretty much ideal conditions to do this testing. This is after we did the VO2 max with you.
Mhm.
And I run an 11-minute 5-second mile at zone two. So for people listening that think you're quote unquote in zone two and you're running an 8-minute mile, um, I can tell you with certainty, unless you're an Olympic, level marathoner, and
Or Andy.
that, or yeah, or
Or
Andy,
Andy.
yeah, exactly. It probably not you. And again, my VO2 max is 61, so my fitness is decent, and I'm
Mhm.
running an 11-minute 5-second zone 2 mile on flat terrain. You throw some hills in there, you got to start speed walking some of those. And again, this is to keep your within zone two, the fat burning efficiency bottom level of the pyramid. That is so, so important, that you said compromises 80% of your training. And so I just wanted to put that out there for people. I heard someone the other day, I was with a group of family, and there was a new person there that I hadn't met before, and he does running, and he said he does his zone twos at 158. And I just know that that's not zone two. I know he hasn't done testing and gotten the metrics. It's just not accurate. It's too high for that person, and especially knowing his physical capabilities, he's more like upper zone three with that.
I forget the name of the athlete who broke the 2-hour marathon record in very
Mhm.
controlled conditions, but he broke the 2-hour marathon the entire time he was in zone two.
Yeah.
So just
Yeah. Yeah.
imagine that level of fitness. So here you are, a very, very, very fit person. You're more fit than 95% of people in your decade, and your zone two is at an 11-minute mile. This person is running, what's that, sub 5-minute mile for
Yeah.
26 miles, and they're staying
Yeah.
in zone two. Well, there are
Yeah.
people who fall out of, when you fall out of zone two, what that means is when you go into zone three, you're starting to build up lactate, which is
Yes.
telling us that you're using less oxygen and more sugar for burning fuel. So when you leave zone two and go into zone three, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's no longer,
Mhm.
oxygen dependent. There are people who are diabetic that will be at lactate threshold, or they'll cross over outside of zone two just walking their dog.
Yeah.
So that's how different we all can be. And those three people could be the same age.
Yes.
Those three people could be the same age. So it's a very important metric to understand and improve, because there's a massive difference between what a diabetic needs who has no fitness experience whatsoever, to a weekend warrior, to an elite athlete. It's just, you
And
can't just do math equations and say here's what your zone two is.
we hear a lot of people say that they hate doing cardio, right? And the reason is, and I realized this a long time ago, is they're going too hard, too fast, like too long. Like, and that's why, you run 3-4 minutes and then you're walking and you're out of breath and your ankles hurt and you're like, cardio sucks. And you do the same thing on the rower, same thing on the bike, and every piece of quote unquote cardio you're training, you're training at too high of a heart rate. Okay. So for people listening to this, you got to get your metrics down. You got to get a heart rate monitor. You got to stay in zone two for a long time. You got to build a base. You're going to start liking cardio, and it's going to be a
So
lot slower and more enjoyable for you versus this crash and burn.
that's exactly right. And zone two should be pretty meditative. You should be able to listen to a podcast or a book. You should be able to commune with your thoughts and enjoy nature. And I love what Dr. Peter Attia says. It's perceived exertion. So basically, if you and I were doing a zone 2 workout on a treadmill together, we could carry a
Yep.
conversation. Anyone listening to that conversation would recognize that we're huffing and puffing and sweating and working out, but we're able to structure sentences. Now, do we want
Yes.
them to be long, drawn out sentences like this podcast? Absolutely not. But we can certainly converse, pick up a phone, and talk to someone. Again, the person on the other end of the line is going to hear that we're breathing heavy, that we're exercising. But the moment you're at a point where, like during a HIIT class, a lot of people take these HIIT classes. Well, can you carry a conversation with them in the middle of that HIIT class?
Hmm.
Absolutely not. And they
Hmm.
say, "Oh no, I do this HIIT class for 45 minutes to an hour." Well, that's all zone 3,
Yep.
and very little zone 4 for the average person. And if you did that 5 days a week, you're going to create a hell of a lot more inflammation and oxidation in your body than you care to have, and you can compromise a lot of things like hormones, etc. So zone 2 is long duration, low intensity, and it should be enjoyable.
That's a very important point that you brought that up, with if you're out of zone 2 for too much of your training, how bad that affects the body,
Mm-hmm.
testosterone, hormones, inflammation. This is why we see like chronic CrossFitters that do hard CrossFit, 20 to 40-minute intervals, 5 days a week. They're all jacked up, right? Like the majority of them, or endurance athletes that don't know what they're doing. Same thing. They're just complete train wrecks.
You know,
Sleepers off.
it's funny because a lot of them want to get their blood work done with me, and we check their testosterone. Like
Yep.
these are men and women who just look fantastic, and
Yep.
they've been doing CrossFit for a long time. They can do amazing things. They're just not feeling right. Um, but you would look at them and say, "My goodness! Not only is there nothing wrong with these people, they are like the fittest among us." And then you look and the male's testosterone is like 211,
Yep.
which is incredibly low. That would be the mechanism, and the inflammation is high, and so yeah, overtraining and under recovering is a big problem in that culture.
Yes. Okay, cool. So we talked about how to train it. The last thing within that is, and I'll just hit on this briefly and then we're wrap this up. Is 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off protocol for 4 to 6 sets. And so the 4 minutes on would be your VT2 score, which would be a lactate threshold, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that like a zone 4, Dr. G?
Yeah, so you're that threshold where the buildup of lactate is happening so fast, you're going to give out. So what you can do. So you're raising that peak of the pyramid, so to speak. You'd want what can you do at maximum effort for 3 to 4 minutes without conking out before that. So if you conk out at 2 minutes, well then you took it too far, right? You took it too
Mhm.
heavy. So your VT threshold, your VT2 or your ventilatory threshold 2 is that point where you're you're burning a lot of sugar, you're manufacturing a lot of sugar, burning it, and you're converting that sugar. The waste product is lactate, and the lactate can also result in rapid decline in function because of fatigue. Um, so what you could do for 4 minutes, and like you said, 4 to 6 intervals of that would be how you would
Yep.
raise your VO2 max peak.
Yeah.
VO2 training. I wouldn't do that more than once or twice a week at most.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, even with where I am, it's once a week.
Yeah.
I don't go into the twice a week. And that could be something for a beginner, as something as speed walking on a hill for 4 minutes, walk down for 4 minutes, recover, and then repeat that for 4 to 6 sets. You could do it on a rower, treadmill, a lot of different things. So I just want to bring up, yeah, you and I are obviously collaborating on, a future project that we're going to talk about down the road. Super exciting. We will be bringing this technology to Co Movement Gym. hopefully sooner than later. So that will be excellent. And I'm going to need your advice and guidance along that, but I've got you. I've got you in my pocket, Dr. G. And so let's wrap this up. First off, thank you. This is the first part of a 3-part series that you and I are going to be diving into. So today we talked about VO2 max and the importance of that, how to test it. So to wrap this up, how can listeners learn more about your services and all the great things that you're doing?
Oh, so anything Dr. Stephen G. So DrSteveng. If it's on Instagram, it's Dr. Stephen G. If it's on X or YouTube or Facebook, it's all at Dr. Stephen G. And my website is drsteveng.com. So that's kind of where you'll find me. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Cyrene Labs, which is very exciting for the world of blood chemistry and testing. It's something that is not very relevant in New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, but all other 47 states can benefit a great deal from what we're going to be coming out with shortly.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. We'll put those websites and links in the show descriptions. And yeah, all right. So next time, Dr. G, thank you.
Thank you. Had a great time, Josh.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting our sponsors, Native Path Supplements, Lombardi Chiropractic, and A Dog's Day Out Doggy Daycare. They help us bring you 2 new episodes each month and have a special discount just for our listeners. See the show notes for more details. Thank you, and see you next time on the Co-Movement Gym podcast.